Hey, what's up guys? Alan Bishop with the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, your source for all things distillation related, whether it be home distilling and or professional distilling. Just an interest in distilling all around on the channel, where sometimes we mess things up and we learn from that, and I learn as much from you as you do from me. At least I hope that's the case. So back today with some viewer questions, and just wanted to tell you guys that the competition to win a copy of the Alchemist Cabinet Philosophy Volume 1 book, autographed by myself, as well as the 2 DVDs, the Alan Bishop Experience, as well as the Short History of Distilling and Indiana's Black Forest DVD, and some various other things, is still ongoing. I am asking you guys for recipes that are catered towards running on the little 5-gallon Black Forest Edition 13 stills still that I helped design and Jason Wade Harrell built. What we're looking for is either a mash bill and or a process that makes use of that still in an interesting way that would challenge me as a distiller, whether it be a whiskey or a brandy or a modified brandy or even botanical spirits, using the weapon of mass extraction head that is on that still, which is a 1-gallon gin basket for a 5-gallon still. If you're going to do it, go big, right? So checking in today, going to get into some of these viewer questions. Probably do several videos this evening. That's what I did last time. I just dropped my papers everywhere. So we're going to start here with this one. Also, be sure to reach out to me if you have any questions, bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, any of my social media accounts, and or the YouTube comments below, and I will try to get to you. Now, I will say this. Viewership on the channel has went up substantially since I went on Jesse's podcast, the Still It podcast, and since Jesse did the Absinthe project. And, you know, this past week, you may have seen a video that I recorded after being in an automobile accident. I'm fine. I'm sore for a couple days. I'm okay. But I had several questions that were printed off. They were in my vehicle at the time. I don't know where they're at now. So if I miss your question, let's say in the next couple weeks, and it was a question that I had acknowledged directly to you, please reach back out to me and send me that question again, and I will do my best to answer it. You know, sometimes life gets the better of us and it takes a minute to get everything back on track, but we're doing good. We're doing fine. I got a cool little rental car. Everything's golden. I ain't hurt. I don't think the other person was hurt, thankfully. So moving forward. All right. So today's question here, let's see. This is from Dustin Shepard, who says, and my wood stove is going to kick on because I am in the woodshed because it's way too cold to be sitting on the porch recording videos. So Dustin says, Alan, finally getting around to listening in on one of the podcasts. He's talking about my podcast, Distillers Talk with Christy Atkinson, where you can find wherever you listen to podcasts. There was some mention from Josh of Ranger Creek, one of the best distillers in the United States as far as I'm concerned, by the way, guys, that the previous distillers didn't believe much in the way changing outcomes in the way of changing outcomes by using various different yeasts at different rates. Obviously, yeast species will sway flavor profile. When referring to pitching rates dictating flavor profiles, are we talking strictly under/over pitching having an outcome on the flavor, or is it more of a reference to pitching rates of multiple species of yeast? Thanks for any clarification that you can provide. This is an excellent question. I love yeast questions because yeast is one of those things that, unfortunately, in American craft distilling and home distilling, less so in home distilling, thankfully, is not that well researched, understood, or applied. It's the same in Scotch whiskey. You know, a lot of those guys think yeast is yeast. What we were really talking about on that program is the way that yeast can affect flavor profile. Even after the maturation of a whiskey or a brandy, by using different yeast strains, you know, you can get some flavor drift 10 to 15% away from what your ordinary product is, everything else being the same, but just using a different variety of yeast. I believe what we were talking about was potentially co-pitching yeast, which is something I do at Spirits of French Lick. I divide my fermenters, my cooks, into two different days to go into one fermenter. So 1,200 gallon fermenter, 600 gallon cooker. And the reason I do that is that I use 2 different strains. Day 1, I use a strain that we propagate ourselves to pull the grain flavor to the forefront. And day 2, I'll use 1 of 3 different brandy yeast. So the grain forefront yeast that we use actually gets taken over by that brandy yeast the second day, because that brandy yeast is a killer strain. It's incredibly efficient and it takes over the fermentation. But I do get the beneficial aspects of that grain forward yeast for 24 hours, which is what I want. We were talking about pitch rates, and I'd have to go back and listen to the show to see exactly where that conversation was going, because it's been a while since we recorded that particular episode of Distillers Talk. But I suspect what we may have been talking about was overpitching yeast, which a lot of people do. Can you overpitch yeast? There are people that will tell you that you can't. I will tell you that personally, I do believe that you can. And it does give exactly what you'd expect it to, a yeasty sort of aroma, right? Now, whether or not you can clean that up, or whether or not you want that aroma or you see it as beneficial, that's 2 different things. One of the other things we may have been talking about was cutting the yeast back a little bit, right? So going less than 1 gram per gallon. So that is much less efficient, obviously, at fermentation. And it has some very serious risks to it because you risk getting, acetobacter or lactobacillus or whatever else into your mash and possibly losing that mash or ruining your mash. But it can also cause the yeast to struggle a little bit and give you some positive aspects over time, depending on what you're going for, what tradition you're working off of, etc. We talked about this a little bit before, and it came up last night when I was teaching a class on distilling for work. There are certain products in the world where an American palate might taste it on a judging panel and go, well, this brandy's got a little bit of VA to it, just a little slight vinegar, a little acetic to it. But in the region of the world that brandy was made in, and for the style of brandy that might be traditional to that style of brandy. And so it really depends on what you're after, what you like, what you're trying to do, etc. I don't know if that entirely addressed your question, but I think that's where you were heading with it, and that's kind of the best way that I have to put it into words right at this moment. What I will tell all of you, though, is don't be afraid to play around with different yeast strains. Not all of them are going to be well acclimated to higher ABV washes or mashes, and they may not finish completely. You may start off with a 1.075 specific gravity and only get down to a 1.010, and there's a lot of reasons that could be. Part of it could be the yeast. Now, what's interesting about that is you leave some residual sugars behind, and although you're not distilling those sugars, you are distilling over the aromatic components of those sugars, so you do get a residual qualitative effect on the spirit once you've distilled it off. I've played around with all kinds of crazy yeast strains. I've done beer strains, ale strains, wine strains, obviously whiskey strains, bread yeast. Honestly, I love Fleischmann's. There's nothing wrong with Fleischmann's yeast. If you want a grain forward spirit, Fleischmann's yeast is going to give it to you, and it's not going to hurt anything. It's something that I personally prefer and something that I actually really enjoy. You're going to hear other distillers out there in the world say, oh, the yeast doesn't really matter. They're wrong. They're very wrong. The yeast does matter, especially in pot still distillation. Like I said, it could be off profile 10 to 15%. One of the experiments that we do at work quite commonly is if we're going to make 50 runs of, say, something like Lee W. Sinclair bourbon whiskey or 4-grain whiskey, which is 60% corn, 17 wheat, 13% oat, and 10% caramel malt. The last 2 or 3 runs that we do for the year, we leave everything exactly the same, and we switch out the yeast strains to one of the yeast strains that I've either collected from one of the old local distilleries here in the Black Forest of Southern Indiana, or even over to Cognac yeast. And the idea is that in a few years, you'll be able to go into those barrels, and those barrels are going to be off profile. So they're going to make great single barrels. They're going to be barrels that a liquor store might want to pick up because it's obviously, the Lee Sinclair profile, but a little skewed in a different direction, making it unique and interesting. The other thing that I hope to do in time is I would love for you guys to be able to go to the store and find, say, a gift pack of, if it's my product, let's say 5 200 milliliter bottles of Lee W. Sinclair bourbon whiskey, or 5 200 milliliter bottles of Matty Gladden or Solomon Scott or whatever whiskey that we're making. And the only difference between those 5 samples to be what yeast was used, so that you guys can really see how yeast affects flavor. But you guys are home distillers. If you're a home distiller, you're at home, you can do this with anything that you want to do it with. If you've got a product that you love, something that you really believe in, that you make on a regular basis, try it. Start playing around with different yeast strains, right? Leave everything else the same that you always do it. Put a different yeast strain in there and see how it affects things. See how the flavor changes, right? You might find that your product gets better with a different yeast strain. It might be as much better with a different yeast strain as it was if you went from using rye as a secondary grain to wheat as a secondary grain. There can be that major of an effect. So don't overlook just how versatile yeast is and what it does for the spirits that you are making. So I hope I touched on your question at least a little bit. I feel like I was a little scatterbrained on this one. This is my first video back, obviously, since what I told you happened. We're getting there, guys. Hey, thanks for all your support. As always, please go to thealchemistcabinet.com. You can find all the links to all the other things I do there, including Distillers Talk, the old alchemistcabinet.wordpress.com blog. If you're interested at all in Indiana distilling history, I archived a lot of that stuff there. You can find the Warehouse One, which is our store where we sell all of our merchandise, including the book, including the DVDs. I've got some unique staves on there, including some, I'll get it out in a minute, guys, including some Cognac staves that I took, cut apart, and actually put a very light char on. We've got some peach bitter staves on there. There's still some grain packages. There's apparel. There's coffee mugs, all that stuff. So every bit of that money goes back into helping support, obviously, me and my family, but also this channel and allowing me to continue to do what I love. I appreciate all y'all, and thank you guys for reaching out on that video that I did about the accident and all that stuff. A lot of people reached out to me, and it meant the world to me. And it wasn't just people that I know in real life that are very close friends or family. with some of you guys too that I've never met in person. It's awesome. I love y'all. Have fun. Later.